In the symbolist model of ancient Egypt, at least two concurrent simultaneous levels are at work in any given instance. One is the study of Egypt as a civilization that existed in a factual geographic place and time, its people, mythology, social forms, its chronological unfolding, its monuments and artifacts. But this is only a backdrop or support for another Egypt, which might be called a quality of intelligence. This Egypt is outside chronological consideration. It is rather both an ever-present and recurring possibility of consciousness. There are two different stories told about this same land, two different histories, almost as if there were two Egypts. This ancient land has always partaken of a dual nature. The public face of Egypt is known the world over and told in every history book. But there is another side of Egypt that is not so widely known. Egypt is also a land of secrets. Another history, a secret history, tells of Egypt as the inheritor of deep wisdom and magical ability from an even earlier ancestor culture. It is the account of the Egyptians themselves. This alternate history is echoed by parallel accounts from the myth and history of other ancient cultures, as well as myriad secret societies and occult sources. The remarkable number of parallels in these stories provides a unique window into this other Egypt. In this six-part series, we will take a look at the shadowy history and magical practices of this other Egypt. Egypt as the keeper of secrets, the land of riddles, the birthplace of magic, and the home of the mystery schools. As we join symbolist author and Egyptologist John Anthony West for a symbolist tour of magical Egypt, we will explore not only the sacred sites, but the ancient teachings that lie concealed there. We will see the ancient mysteries through a decoding lens, a cipher that brings the lost magic to life and returns to humanity the teachings and magic of our ancestors.
I think it's possible to say that Egypt regarded the entire universe as an a gigantic act of magic. The transformation of consciousness into the material universe.
Did ancient Egypt inherit its mysterious abilities from an even older culture, lost to history and forgotten by the modern world?
Hidden in the stones, blueprints of a lost art from a lost world. Behind the veil lies another Egypt, hidden in Egypt, magical Egypt.
Although Western civilization is generally considered to be the product of Greek and Roman culture, the Greeks and Romans both acknowledge ancient Egypt as the source of great ancient wisdom, a mysterious land of riddles whose secrets were considered the highest prize to some of the greatest minds in history. Egypt was known to the ancient world as a repository of high knowledge and magical practices. These universal secrets were contained and kept alive in the mystery schools. The teachings and magical ability they imparted were held in the highest secrecy and reverence. Entrance to the temples that held the secrets was tightly restricted. They were the domain of royalty, priests, and privileged initiates. Forefathers of modern thought, such as Pythagoras, Plato, and others, tell of waiting more than 20 years preparing before acceptance into the mystery schools. The secret teachings were known as esoteric or occult or symbolist teachings and were held to contain the secrets of the universe and the keys to great magic. Those who were allowed to receive the revelations of the mystery schools often went on to become history's greatest minds and a who's who of historical movers and shakers. Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, Galileo, Copernicus, Da Vinci, Kepler, Isaac Newton, Napoleon. They were rewarded for their pursuit of the ancient wisdom with not just knowledge, but a new way of thinking that allowed them to write their names in human history. There is even mention of Jesus returning from Egypt with not only a profound knowledge of esoteric study, but the ability to perform miracles. Hermeticism and the writings from the Hermetica were held to be the Western retelling of the wisdom from the mystery schools. They contained, albeit in a degenerated form, strains of the ancient wisdom said to have been passed down from the gods.
There are fragmentary Hermetic texts dating from, dates in dispute, but dating from 3rd, 2nd, 1st centuries AD, in which the language and mode of expression is ancient Greek, but the subject matter is, if not entirely, largely derived from or actually a part of the ancient Egyptian doctrine of the transformation of the soul. This is the basis of the Hermetic belief, and it then proliferates into those various disciplines, is practiced in one form or another throughout Islam, percolates up into Western Europe in the Italian Renaissance, and then occupies much of the minds and hearts and studies of major Renaissance figures, up to and including Isaac Newton, who actually spent much more time of his life studying alchemy and number symbolism than he did studying what would now be modern science. This is an acknowledged fact that is seldom acknowledged by modern scientists. But as a matter of fact, Newton might be called not one of the last, certainly, but one of the most eminent of the Hermeticists.
Although today, in much of the Western academic world, the symbolist interpretation of ancient Egypt is vigorously opposed, in its ancestral form it was the object of great fascination and in some cases obsession with some of the greatest minds and forces in human history. The term mystery schools refers not to a specific place or time in ancient Egypt, but the timeless secret teachings passed down through word of mouth, or sometimes encrypted into the temples, concealed and enshrined behind a veil of hieroglyphs and symbolism. What secrets were held in the mystery schools that made them so important, so sought after? One of the secrets of the ancient mystery schools was an alternate history of human past that is cyclical. Civilization, consciousness, understanding, and ability, rising to incredible heights in the distant past and then falling back into barbarism, again and again, like the waves of high and low tides. This story has resonance in all cultures in the stories of the flood or the periodic catastrophes from many ancient myths. In this alternative model of our past, a vast accumulation of knowledge and ability was inherited from previous epochs. A legacy of high wisdom from an incredibly distant past is the source of the mysteriously powerful and unexplained accomplishments of the ancients. Accomplishments which, even by today's standards, seem in scope and operation to be nothing short of feats of magic. Ancient Egypt wielded a mastery over the material world that bordered on the supernatural. It seemed at times almost alien, its art and architecture showing not only an understanding, but an eerie control of the invisible forces and building blocks of our material world. Rightly considered powerful and dangerous tool, it was guarded with the utmost secrecy. Some priests accepted death before divulging the secrets to conquering Roman usurper pharaohs. Where did they learn the science behind these incredible acts? And stranger still, how could these abilities just appear, seemingly complete, at the very beginnings of Egyptian history? Where did the knowledge come from? The Egyptians, both ancient and modern, remain curiously silent on this topic. Egypt seems to have started out at its height and gradually declined, like a copy of a copy of a copy. Over the centuries, the mysteries held a little less with each successive retelling. In an attempt to guard the magic from abuse at the hands of the profane public, the mystery schools went into hiding. The ancient secrets were shrouded in allegory and symbol and placed under the guardianship of various streams of initiatic and secret societies. In time, it appeared that many, if not all, connections to the original source were severed or so diluted that the true mysteries were lost to history. Over the millennia, the temples fell into ruin, and eventually so did the teachings they enshrined. When the great library of Alexandria was burned, all hope of reconnection to the wisdom of the past seemed lost. When we return, we look at an unusual man who rekindled the lost magic and returned to the modern world the teachings and wisdom of the ancient mystery schools. The secrets and magic of the mystery schools seemed lost to history when in 1937 a most unusual man again reopened a window into this culture and the magical technology that was its legacy. R.A. Schwaller de Lubitz was a latter-day alchemist, as well as an accomplished mathematician, chemist, author, and philosopher. Schwaller opened a window into the lost magic and mentality of the ancients. Through an ingenious reinterpretation of the evidence, Schwaller recreated a model of ancient Egypt that resurrects the ancient secrets for modern eyes. Understanding the mentality of the ancient world through the decoding lens of symbolism, Schwaller showed the Egyptians were not the superstitious savages modern Western academic thought holds them to have been. Instead, he showed example after example of high wisdom and accomplishment, not only equaling that of modern science, but in some instances far surpassing modern abilities. The key that unlocked the ancient veil lie in a slight change in perspective of mindset. As one learns to enter the mindset of pharaonic Egypt, the cryptic message from the past comes to life and allows access to previously invisible and unimagined realms of consciousness, understanding, and ability. The crux of the old teachings was contained and transmitted through what Schwaller called sacred science, which included symbolism, harmonic proportion, and sacred geometry. Sacred science was the original unified source of the myriad streams of modern mysticism, occultism, esotericism, and magical disciplines that exist today. It is also the unified source for such diverse contemporary sciences as chemistry, physical science, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, geometry, architecture, music, and mathematics. Through the linchpin of sacred sciences, Schwaller not only showed an original unity of the material sciences, but even shed new light on such shadowy subjects as the tarot, astrology, and many, many other forms of magic. Schwaller spent over a decade on-site at Luxor Temple, which would come to be known as the Temple of Man. It was here that he performed his master work.
A latter-day Renaissance man. He was born in the 1890s, died in the early 1960s, and was, among other things, a practicing latter-day alchemist, and very much deeply involved in alchemy. He was also thoroughly conversant with the esoteric and mystical traditions of the East, and at the same time, equally conversant and familiar with the modern developments in science, mathematics, physics, and so on. It was Schwaller who, in 2 decades of work in Egypt, mainly at the Temple of Luxor, who reformulated in transmittable and accessible fashion the wisdom of the ancients. It is through Schwaller that we're able, for the first time, to actually gain access to the doctrine, the sacred science or sacred sciences responsible for those astonishing resonating temples, pyramids, and tombs. Prior to Schwaller, there was a long-standing tradition dating back to the Greeks themselves, in which ancient Egypt was the fount of all wisdom, which subsequently degenerated and dispersed over time. But prior to Schwaller, it was impossible to actually argue from documented evidence that this was indeed the case. Schwaller provides the documentation in impeccable form. It's there to be disproved if anyone can do so. In the 50 years since Schwaller produced the body of his work, a number of scholars have abused him roundly, but none have actually offered anything resembling satisfactory disproof or discredit to his extraordinary works.
In its own way, the Temple of Man was a kind of Rosetta Stone. It contained the means within itself, while to decode and reconstruct the layers and subtleties of the symbolic and sacred technology of the ancient mysteries. Schwaller showed that the temple was not just the location of the teaching, but was itself the teaching. Its hieroglyphics and harmonic proportions contained a catalogue of the occult laws, sacred geometry, and archetypal forces that combined to make the universe, at its culmination, living man. Through a chain of analogies, occult correspondences, sacred geometry, and symbolism, the temple itself becomes the actual technology through which one can undergo the initiation process and begin to experience the mentality and magic of the ancients. When correctly interpreted, the temple echoes and amplifies the great arcanum, as above, so below. Man and the cosmos can be seen to be magically analogous, governed by the same rules of sacred geometry, each an octave of the other. After Schwaller's death, the torch was picked up by a new generation of symbolists, one of the most venerated of whom is John Anthony West. West brought the obscure French work to the public eye in the symbolist classic Serpent in the Sky. West not only rekindled Schwaller's revelations, but built upon them in a manner that acted like a fulcrum, upsetting the Stoic worlds of archaeology, theology, and science. When Serpent was published, shockwaves erupted as an evidence bomb that lay in full view of all at the very site of the Great Sphinx exploded. An observation by Schwaller, mentioned in passing, caught West's attention. Schwaller noticed and recorded the fact that vertical fissures cut deep into the walls of the Sphinx enclosure. West consulted Boston University geologist Robert Schoch. His intuition was confirmed. These vertical fissures were unmistakable signs of precipitation-induced erosion. They were the telltale sign of exposure to years and years of rain. But it hasn't rained in the Sahara Desert since before the Ice Age. Could this be proof that the Sphinx, or at least the Sphinx enclosure, was the product of an even older civilization, predating the catastrophic events at the end of the last Ice Age?
We believe that our Sphinx theory, the water weathering of the Sphinx, is evidence of those of that earlier civilization. And until or unless the water weathering of the Sphinx is adequately explained within the context of accepted chronology of ancient Egypt, it remains a thorn in the side of orthodoxy, because until it is explained, it seems to suggest that, or very strongly suggests, that the Sphinx was there prior to those catastrophic events that put the rest of the civilization down. And there are other bits and pieces of geological evidence and architectural evidence that we believe supports the theory of an advanced, or let us say again carefully within inverted quotes, an Atlantean civilization. But this is the big issue, whether or not there was such a civilization. We have, of course, on the textual side, we have Plato's account of Atlantis that supposedly came to him from his grandfather Solon, who himself got it from an Egyptian priest. This would be somewhere around 6th or 7th centuries BC, somewhere that kind of area. And of course we also have throughout the world, around the world, everywhere, in the higher or more sophisticated civilizations, as well as in the mythologies and legends of widely separated traditional societies, we have accounts, virtually all of them have accounts of a deluge. A deluge is a commonplace, and in many of them, if not in all, there are also references to vanished civilizations, vanished high levels of civilization, golden ages in the past, and the ubiquity of these stories is enough to make, I would believe, any serious scholar at least hold an open mind to the possibility that these advanced civilizations did indeed exist, and that they did indeed go down or disappear virtually entirely under the catastrophic conditions prevailing for several thousands of years following the event, whatever it may have been, or events that initiated the melting of the ice and the dissolution of the last ice age.
After years of research and study, John not only brought new life to the work of Schwaller, but has himself become an icon for a new generation of esotericists and symbolists. In addition to the bombshell water weathering theory, he has become a veritable compendium of symbolist theory and history. His research is ongoing, and to this day, his on-site tours and lectures continue to be a wellspring of revelations about this ancient land and the magical secrets it still holds. As we join west for a symbolist tour of Egypt, we begin to glimpse the magic and mysteries still waiting here. Encoded into the ruins are the preserved seeds of a technology and mentality that, by comparison to even modern standards, are at the far edge of comprehension. When seen through symbolist eyes, the revelations of the ancient mystery schools come to life again, often causing a personal transformation from which there is no return.
Florence Nightingale, surprisingly enough, one of the most perceptive of the visitors to Egypt, in 1850 wrote, "One wonders that people can come back from Egypt and live lives the way they lived them before." This proves to be the case 150 years later. It's very rare that anybody who takes on 16 days in Egypt on one of these magical Egypt tours comes back home unchanged.
Far from being a lost or dead technology, the temples continue to perform their function of inducing initiation. It is difficult to distinguish between witnessing the majesty and mystery of the temples and participating in the transformative process oneself.
We are confronted by temples, by artwork, by pyramids, by structures that evoke in us a kind of emotion that is very hard to ascribe to mere superstition or romantification or romance. And these temples are based upon principles that are, in fact, sacred sciences. They are, let us say, the science of immortality, the science of attaining eternal life. And the sacred sciences are a kind of knowledge, very different from our kind of knowledge, but scientific nonetheless, based upon readily communicable principles. And these principles, embodied in these spectacular temples, tombs, pyramids, artwork, and so on, these principles evoke in us that sense of the eternal, of the divine, of the sacred, and they are, we might say, all of these temples are means of accessing that higher consciousness that we, by birthright, have access to, but if left to our own devices, leading our normal workaday lives, we don't readily access, and in many cases don't access at all.
An exposure to the sacred science residing here often causes spiritual stirrings and many other phenomena normally considered supernatural. It is sometimes as if this old magic is transmitted to us through our eyes. Its spell is cast through sacred geometry and volume. The harmonic proportions and hieroglyphs speak into our normal faculties while operating simultaneously on a higher octave to awaken and reconnect us to our higher selves, an experience sometimes referred to as waking up.
The sacred sciences that fueled or that underpinned these temples involved mathematics, philosophy, religion, art, and in fact, ancient Egypt, perhaps the greatest of these ancient civilizations, or in any event, it's the ancient civilization to which we have most access. It's left us the greatest legacy of sacred art and architecture. This was a profound doctrine that fused art, religion, philosophy, and science into one inextricable whole, whereas in our society, art, religion, philosophy, and science are separate disciplines with little or no relationship to each other. In ancient Egypt, they were inextricably entwined, so there was no art that wasn't religious, no religion that wasn't philosophical, no philosophy that wasn't scientific, no science that wasn't art. When we are in the presence of one of these Egyptian temples, we are, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, put into the presence of the divinity or the principle to which that temple is consecrated, and whether we like it or not, we respond often with awe and wonder. And this awe and wonder is not, let us say, an artifact of our susceptible imagination or romanticism on our part. It's an example of the high science of the ancients, a sacred science.
The sacred science, the timeless wisdom of the mystery schools, the secrets of the invisible college, and the keys to powerful magic have been preserved, enshrined behind a veil of harmony, proportion, myth, and symbolism. It's said that symbolism is the first veil. The initiate or student of the mysteries begins his path with this most important tool. Through an understanding of symbolism, the old wisdom is revealed. The symbol speaks to a different part of the brain than does ordinary writing or language. The right brain, the intuitive, non-verbal, visual brain, which deals with spatial and abstract relationships, with intuition and the subconscious. The part of the brain that is not bound by rational, linear logic. Perhaps the part of the brain which is host to our higher selves, our innate divinity. The enigmatic language of symbolism serves as a bridge between the two modes or polarities of intelligence described by Schwaller. As such, it goes beyond language to become a sort of user-evolving technology, as the symbol promotes the cooperation and coordination, the simultaneous and unified interworking of the two hemispheres of the brain. This is one aspect of the alchemical arcanum of the androgyne, the union of the sun and moon. The true dweller in two worlds partakes of a kind of dual intelligence, the separating, discriminating intelligence of logic and reason, and the unifying, integrating intelligence of intuition and recognition, instinct and inspiration. Through the balanced coordination and simultaneous wielding of both types of intelligence, a new, formerly invisible world opens to us. The ancient technology of hieroglyphic symbolism becomes a kind of evolutionary stepladder, optimizing and empowering the mind of the user.
Every gesture, every costume, every headdress, every implement used in these reliefs will have a specific meaning that will communicate holistically, instantaneously to the beholder, or to the initiated beholder at any rate. So the symbol is actually a very brilliant and sophisticated means for transmitting very complex meanings universally, but the understanding of that meaning will depend upon the level of expertise or initiation of the beholder.
Symbolism allows the mind to intuitively see what is not directly visible in the material world around us. The symbol at once contains not only a specific object or concept, but also a bundle of invisible qualities and tendencies that it embodies.
The Egyptians commonly used birds, animals, plants for their own symbolic reasons. And when you look into them, you find that the bird, animal, plant, or whatever is taken from real life, but it is the embodiment itself of certain principles. For example, a bird flies. This is what we associate with birds. So we'll symbolize the volatile. The principle of volatility is associated with spirit, in other words, the ethereal. So the bird carries that complex of meanings. It's a big mistake to think that this is a carryover from earlier animistic or totemistic or still more superstitious beliefs. Rather, it is a very complex and sophisticated and scientific way of allowing the beholder access into the actual meaning, the abstract meaning of the principles that are anchored by the material symbol: bird, lioness, dog, monkey, etc., etc., etc.
As one becomes versed in reading symbolism, one learns the art of looking past the visible symbol to the underlying rules, the archetypes, the forces and occult connections that it represents. Because each symbol expresses an essential component of sacred science, profound esoteric wisdom could be encoded and read from the symbolism held in hieroglyphs and reliefs, as well as in the geometry, volume, proportion, and number symbolism incorporated into the temples. This symbolism acted not only as a repository of meaning, but was itself a component of magical technology. The symbol of the winged disc held a place of prominence over every door in the ancient temples. The sheer ubiquity of the sign speaks to it being deeply important to the Egyptians. What did it mean? The incarnating or excarnating spirit is symbolized as a winged sun, an ancient emblem for the indestructible human soul, both in birth and in death. The symbol of the winged disc served as a constant reminder that just as the initiate entered each room to perform a task and leave again, that so was the spirit only temporarily housed in the flesh. The more constant the attention to self-perfection, the greater the abilities in the next life, the next world. This was the great work, the art of constructing and constantly working to perfect the tower within. Like a shoehorn for the wandering mind, it continuously returned one's thoughts to the work of preparing for the afterlife. In the symbolism of the snake, we get another glimpse into the sophistication and high wisdom of the ancients.
Energy, which is what modern physicists recognize as the, let's say, the substructure or the primordial stuff of the universe, is really another name for despiritualized consciousness. Energy manifests itself through vibration, through polarity, through the sine wave. The ancients in all civilizations were thoroughly cognizant of that and portrayed energy or vibration, often as a snake, which, moving along the ground or through water, in fact produces a sine wave. So the snake is the perfect symbol, and it is pretty much a universal symbol for unity becoming duality, and it is unity that becoming duality that is the cosmological basis of all valid philosophical systems. Vibration, of course, is the means whereby the arts are transmitted to us, to our emotional faculties. This is obvious in music, of course. This is where we're most familiar with it. Vibration in the form of sound waves, and orchestrated through volume and intensity and tonality and key and so on. Music produces an emotional effect depending upon the piece of music. The great poet Goethe called architecture frozen music. This is not just poetically and metaphorically true, it is actually true. A great temple, or for that matter a shopping mall, communicates its meaning or lack of meaning, as the case may be, entirely through vibration. We tend not to think of it that way because it's visual vibration. Obviously, color transmits itself to us as visual vibration. This we're accustomed to and we recognize, but we don't think of architectural form, which is static, as vibration, but it is indeed vibration, and it communicates exactly, or anyway, analogically exactly, as does music, through harmony, proportion, measure, and geometry, which is the interplay of number.
When seen through the symbolist decoder, this voice from the past suddenly begins telling the same story as the latest findings of modern science. Our own forefront of understanding in many cases lies parallel to the oldest mysteries. In some cases, the old wisdom continues beyond where we ourselves have reached. What else did they know that we have yet to learn? To truly enter the temple, a change in mindset must occur. This is sometimes referred to as the process of initiation into the mysteries, the development of the intelligence of the heart. The initiate must learn to focus on the inside rather than the outside, and look beyond the visible to the invisible, to what lies beneath and the world within. It's precisely the things we don't see, we can't see, that were the secrets of the mystery schools. A sometimes difficult concept to grasp, it can require an adjustment in thinking and perception, as it focuses not on the physical material world, but on its underlying causes. The great mysteries concern the invisible laws, forces, archetypes, and secret connections that are the building blocks, the invisible templates of our reality, and perhaps the roadmap to operating in higher realms as well. One of the most famous of the students of the mystery schools is the legendary Pythagoras. Pythagoras waited and prepared for 20 years before his initiation into this science of the invisible. He went on to start a revolution in thinking when he revealed to the profane world another secret of the Egyptian mysteries. In the simple and irrefutable science of geometry lie the secrets of the universe and of life itself. Pythagoras returned the lost key of meaning to the alchemical maxim, as above, so below. The universe, and man as the embodiment of the universe, live and work by the same rules, are brought into and out of existence by the same forces, and are both subject to the same laws. Each can be understood using the same maps. The shapes and forces described by sacred geometry are the roadmap, and perhaps even the seed of life itself. In the design of the Temple of Karnak, we observe firsthand the sacred geometry that was the source of Pythagoras' inspiration. The invisible science of the ancients was preserved and at the same time veiled behind the symbolism and measure of the temple. The temple itself was the embodiment of the ancient teaching of the mystery schools. Its living walls enshrine and forever teach an understanding of the deep secrets of creation. Its sacred geometry enshrines and mirrors the fundamental geometric laws that are the working schematics of the creator universe and life within it. The temple is consecrated to Amun the Invisible, the animator of form, the breath of life across the waters. The temple is the house of Amun. For a time, it was the living body of Amun. Over the 500-year span of its active life, the temple lived and grew by the same laws of sacred geometry that govern organic life and growth. It was for a time animated by the voice of life. It was host to Amun. The temple incorporates an archetypal or natural geometry that lies behind all of life. This geometry is the result of a mysterious number pattern that occurs throughout nature, known to the modern world as the Fibonacci series. The invisible voice of life shows itself in the material world through an interplay of numbers and form. These primal archetypal forms are the template and seeds of life. The sacred geometry expressed in the Fibonacci series allows us to clearly see this invisible other world that is the mysterious source of life. To better understand the role of the Fibonacci series and organic geometry in the world around us, we met with Michael Schneider, author of A Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe. Michael demonstrates the dynamic presence of the Fibonacci sequence in the living, growing world.
Well, the Fibonacci numbers refers to a sequence of numbers that grow by continual expansion, but a very special balanced growth expansion. And the mathematical definition of them really is an archetypal pattern. Starts off with the numbers 0 and 1. 0 sort of acts like a seed in a sense. 0 and 1, and the rule is that each next term is the sum of the two previous terms. So 0 plus 1 make 1. 1 plus 1 make 2. 1 plus 2 make 3. 2 and 3 make 5. 3 and 5 make 8. 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144, 233, and endless. But it's an expansive pattern that shows organic growth patterns that occur all through nature.
The invisible Fibonacci spiral shows itself in the visible world in the nautilus shell, the sunflower, and the branching of trees.
This mathematical sequence charts nature's progress of organic spiraling growth through self-accumulation. The appearance of this sequence, embodied by the Fibonacci spiral or golden spiral in plants, animals, or solar systems, tells us that the Fibonacci sequence and phi ratio underlie an internal harmony, excellence, and dynamic balance during the inevitable growth and dissolution processes. It is the play of life itself, clothed in the four states of matter. These characteristics are the open secret of balance of animal horns, seashells, plants, and galaxies. For example, as the chambered nautilus creature grows larger, the gland that exudes shell material also grows, building a widening shell. The shell's golden spiral shape maintains the same center of gravity at any size, so the nautilus need not learn how to balance itself as it matures. The same is true for the growing horns of a ram. As the horn material accumulates, growing larger and more massive, its golden spiral shape maintains the same center of gravity. Thus, the ram need not adjust its posture throughout life to uphold its growing horns. Similarly, the tree that puts out branches and leaves in spiral staircases up and around their respective trunks can get enormously large, yet the tree always balances, no matter how massive and complex it grows to be.
And so any kind of organic expansion will benefit from this kind of growth that incorporates balance, physical balance. It will pack the most seeds in the least space. And whenever you find these Fibonacci numbers, you also find spirals. And the benefit of the spiral is, of course, organic, expansive growth in a kind of a fashion that will also maximize all the benefits of the seed properties and so forth. The way they show up in the plant world is rife with these numbers. For example, in this artichoke flower, I will simply, let's see, I'll draw a mark so we know where we started on this, and I'll count this row of petals as one row. And what I'm going to do is count the numbers of parallel rows of petals. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then back to the beginning. So there are 8 rows leading in this direction. But each petal plays a role in 2 directions. So I can also think of these as spiraling this way. And if I count the numbers of parallel rows here, we'll count that as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and back to the beginning. So there are 8 in this direction, 5 in that direction. That's what you find throughout nature. 2 consecutive Fibonacci numbers composing the same structure. And what this does, what this number pattern does, is it gives perfect balance to the structure as it's growing. Not as a static structure, but these Fibonacci numbers and the spiral, the logarithmic organic spiral that occurs with them, balances through growth, transformation, expansion. And that's the beauty of this. It's balanced through growth and change through these numbers. It's an organic expansion from that, you might say, 0 seed to as large as you like, but it's always going to have a self-resembling property. It's the closest, the logarithmic spiral is the closest definition you can get to a definition of life.
The Fibonacci numbers and the sacred geometry they produce seem to be the very voice of life. When we return, we'll see how these numbers were employed in ancient architecture to give life to the temples. As House of Life, consecrated to organic growth and the living world, it is difficult to imagine a more perfect template for the design of Karnak than those patterns governing and animating life itself. To further investigate the presence of the Fibonacci series in the design of Karnak, we went to UCLA campus in Los Angeles. We found a very rare print of a book containing architectural studies of sacred geometry and harmonic design in the temples and monoliths of ancient Egypt. The book is the masterwork of architectural historian Alexander Badawi. It shows the Temple of Karnak to be based upon the same Fibonacci number series that is the very voice of life.
Yes, well, in this book of harmonic design, Alexander Badawi, an art historian and architectural historian, Egyptologist, determines that in the great Temple of Karnak and just about everywhere else in Egypt, very sophisticated harmonic design is what's responsible for the temples, and it is that harmonic design that is in turn responsible for the effect these temples produce. In Karnak in particular, the Fibonacci series is employed in a variety of sophisticated and different ways, and the Fibonacci series in particular is related to the golden section and to the processes of organic growth. In this temple that is consecrated to the material universe, or the, let's say, the animated universe, particularly significant that a mathematical proportion that is found everywhere in nature in the way that things grow, from sunflower seeds to nautilus shells, this Fibonacci series should be employed to determine the various proportions of the temple itself. Specifically consecrated to or dedicated to the principle of the creation of the organic world, the living world. And in keeping with that, not only is it in a state of constant creation, the temple itself is a kind of representation of ideal but even actual organic growth. The temple is consecrated to Amun in his role of animator of form, of the breath or the spirit of life across the waters. One of the more clued in Egyptologists, Alexander Badawi, who was an expert on, or specialist in architecture, worked out that the Fibonacci series is the template, that's the word I want, is the template upon which this entire gigantic construction is based. And to the best of my knowledge, the archaeologists and Egyptologists don't contest this finding. But what they don't do is recognize its significance, because what's significant about it is that if the Egyptians, they knew the Fibonacci spiral. Not only did they know the Fibonacci spiral in series, but they understood full well the role that that played in the organization of the organic world. That's something else again. If they know that, then they're talking about a very high and a sacred science, which is of course exactly what they tried to deny with ancient Egypt. So that's what's going on here in this particular temple. And it's been found, the Fibonacci series has been found in other Egyptian constructions as well. But here's the best and most complete expression of it, exactly in the temple that is in fact consecrated to the organic world. And that's something that even the academics don't deny, that's the function of this. They don't understand that it's part of a complete understanding of the genesis of the universe. Like so many things, it was known in deep antiquity, but particularly when you see Fibonacci spiral associated with a gigantic temple that is consecrated to the principle of organic growth, it becomes very interesting.
The entrance to the temple is flanked by a colonnade of ram-headed sphinxes. The ram is symbolically associated with Amun, and aside from its astrological implications, is an embodiment of the Fibonacci spiral in the shape of its horns. The sacred geometry of the Fibonacci series infused the entire temple, literally brought it to life. The temple is the living embodiment of the numbers and patterns that are the very voice of life, the house of Amun and the body of Amun. The harmonic design acted as a kind of magical technology, affecting us, changing us, inspiring us, bridging the gap between the archetypal and physical worlds, bringing us into the mindset appropriate to commune with the deity or netta to which the temple was consecrated. When understood in the true meaning of netta, Amun becomes the archetype, the embodiment of the invisible forces, laws and forms of life, the physical expression of the laws of nature. Rudolf Steiner, an influential modern mystic from the turn of the century, provides an insight into the thinking and sophistication of the ancients through a thought exercise. Hold a seed in one hand and a stone of similar size in the other. Look at them both and try to visualize how they are the same and how they are different. When the breakthrough occurs, we suddenly see into a higher dimension, the fourth dimension of growth. All living things live in an additional dimension of growth, expansion, and organic change over time. As the living representation of the forces of life, the Temple of Karnak was itself alive. It existed in at least 4 dimensions. In a stunning but not isolated example of 4D architecture, the temple itself not only grew, but grew in accordance with natural law. It was for a time host to Amun. It was animated by the wave of life, continuous construction passed down through the centuries like a torch from one generation to the next. The wave of life passed through it as it did the successive generations of those who worshipped within its living walls.
Not only is it in a state of constant creation, I think the earliest extant bits of this temple date from the Middle Kingdom. Most of it is New Kingdom, some of it is Ptolemaic. And I believe that every single pharaoh has left some element or some piece of, every single pharaoh did something here, some bit of construction. It starts, as all temples do, with the Holy of Holies, the sanctuary, and then grows out. But in this case, it grows out sort of like an onion. In other words, it's in layers that go continually out and out and out and out. They're all together 10 pylons here, I think 6 this way and 4 that way. So it's continually expanding. Each one has to have his stamp on this particular temple, not on other temples. Other temples are built often in one fell swoop, and then additions are made after 1 or 2. But here, every single pharaoh does something or another, and I think that's part of the overriding plan. This 500-year extended exercise in sort of high magic.
This is the science of the invisible science, the science of worship, the worship of science. It is our hope that this brief glimpse into the ancient sciences of the invisible will open a new pair of eyes, trained not on the material, everyday world, but on the realm of the netta, on what lies beneath and what lies beyond, on the world behind the veil. There are 2 different stories told about this same land, 2 different histories, almost as if there were 2 Egypts. This ancient land has always partaken of a dual nature. The public face of Egypt is known the world over and told in every history book. But there is another side of Egypt that is not so widely known. Egypt is also a land of secrets. Another history, a secret history, tells of Egypt as the inheritor of deep wisdom and magical ability from an even earlier ancestor culture. It is the account of the Egyptians themselves. This alternate history is echoed by parallel accounts from the myth and history of other ancient cultures, as well as myriad secret societies and occult sources. The remarkable number of parallels in these stories provides a unique window into this other Egypt. In this 6-part series, we will take a look at the shadowy history and magical practices of this other Egypt. Egypt as the keeper of secrets, the land of riddles, the birthplace of magic, and the home of the mystery schools. As we join symbolist author and Egyptologist John Anthony West for a symbolist tour of magical Egypt, we will explore not only the sacred sites, but the ancient
from, or actually a part of, the ancient Egyptian doctrine of the transformation of the soul. This is the basis of the Hermetic belief, and it then proliferates into those various disciplines. Is practiced in one form or another throughout Islam, percolates up into Western Europe in the Italian Renaissance, and then occupies much of the minds and hearts and studies of major Renaissance figures, up to and including Isaac Newton, who actually spent much more time of his life studying alchemy and number symbolism than he did studying what would now be modern science. This is an acknowledged fact that is seldom acknowledged by modern scientists. But as a matter of fact, Newton might be called not one of the last, certainly, but one of the most eminent of the Hermeticists.
Although today, in much of the Western academic world, the symbolist interpretation of ancient Egypt is vigorously opposed, in its ancestral form it was the object of great fascination and in some cases obsession with some of the greatest minds and forces in human history. The term mystery schools refers not to a specific place or time in ancient Egypt, but the timeless secret teachings passed down through word of mouth, or sometimes encrypted into the temples, concealed and enshrined behind a veil of hieroglyphs and symbolism. What secrets were held in the mystery schools that made them so important, so sought after? One of the secrets of the ancient mystery school, ancient teachings that lie concealed there. We will see the ancient mysteries through a decoding lens, a cipher that brings the lost magic to life and returns to humanity the teachings and magic of our ancestors.
I think it's possible to say that Egypt regarded the entire universe as an a gigantic act of magic, the transformation of consciousness into the material universe.
Did ancient Egypt inherit its mysterious abilities from an even older culture, lost to history and forgotten by the modern world?
A lost tale, hidden in the stones. Blueprints of a lost art, from a lost world. Behind the veil lies another Egypt. Hidden in Egypt. Magical Egypt.
Although Western civilization is generally considered to be the product of Greek and Roman culture, the Greeks and Romans both acknowledge ancient Egypt as the source of great ancient wisdom, a mysterious land of riddles whose secrets were considered the highest prize to some of the greatest minds in history. Egypt was known to the ancient world as a repository of high knowledge and magical practices. These universal secrets were contained and kept alive in the mystery schools. The teachings and magical ability they imparted were held in the highest secrecy and reverence. Entrance to the temples that held the secrets was tightly restricted. They were the domain of royalty, priests, and privileged initiates. Forefathers of modern thought, such as Pythagoras, Plato, and others, tell of waiting more than 20 years preparing before acceptance into the mystery schools. The secret teachings were known as esoteric or occult or symbolist teachings, and were held to contain the secrets of the universe and the keys to great magic. Those who were allowed to receive the revelations of the mystery schools often went on to become history's greatest minds and a who's who of historical movers and shakers. Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, Galileo. Copernicus, Da Vinci, Kepler, Isaac Newton, Napoleon. They were rewarded for their pursuit of the ancient wisdom with not just knowledge, but a new way of thinking that allowed them to write their names in human history. There is even mention of Jesus returning from Egypt with not only a profound knowledge of esoteric study, but the ability to perform miracles. Hermeticism and the writings from the Hermetica were held to be the Western retelling of the wisdom from the mystery schools. They contained, albeit in a degenerated form, strains of the ancient wisdom said to have been passed down from the gods.
There are fragmentary Hermetic texts dating from, dates in dispute, but dating from 3rd, 2nd, 1st centuries AD, in which the language and mode of expression is ancient Greek, but the subject matter is, if not entirely, largely derived.
In the symbolist model of ancient Egypt, at least two concurrent simultaneous levels are at work in any given instance. One is the study of Egypt as a civilization that existed in a factual geographic place and time, its people, mythology, social forms, its chronological unfolding, its monuments and artifacts. But this is only a backdrop or support for another Egypt, which might be called a quality of intelligence. This Egypt is outside chronological consideration. It is rather both an ever-present and recurring possibility of consciousness.